Hello friends, and welcome back to another episode of Spilling Studio. My name is Sam, and this week we have 7 new ARE practice questions designed to help you pass your next exam. There's 6 per exam topic and a bonus question at the end. Let's get into it. First up is practice management. To prove negligence, you are required to prove damage, breach, and what? Cause, duty, offense, collateral, remand. Feel free to pause here to answer. The answer is duty. So first off, what is negligence, you ask? It is the failure to exercise the level of care that a reasonable person would exercise in similar circumstances. It's a civil wrong that causes harm or injury to others. So in order to prove this, you need to prove they were supposed to provide something, they didn't provide that something, and as a result of not providing that something, you experienced loss, harm, or injury, aka duty, breach, and damage. Duty is the obligation by law or contractual agreement. Breach is the failure to fulfill this obligation, and damage is the harm, injury, or loss that results from the first two. Next up is project management. According to AIA document A201, who issues the certificate of payment? Owner, AHJ, architect, contractor, or subcontractors? Pause here to answer. And the answer is architect. AIA document A201 states that the architect is responsible for issuing the certificate of payment. Another contract question, I know, but you're going to get a lot of these on your practice management exam, so please read through these contracts before you go into testing. Links are in the description. The biggest thing to look for when reading these is who is responsible for what. So what does the architect have to do, the owner, and the contractor? You are sure to get a few questions like these on your practice management test. Now, what does the payment process look like? Well, during construction, the contractor will receive periodic payments, which usually are about once a month. This funding is used to purchase materials and pay their subcontractors for their work. The contractor will prepare an application for payment showing how much progress has been made to date, and the architect will review this to make sure the amounts requested are consistent with the amount of work completed and the quantities of materials being stored. This does not mean the architect has made exhaustive site visits, reviewed means or methods, reviewed receipts from contractors, or looked into how the previous payment was used. By certifying the application for payment, the architect is saying that, to the best of their knowledge, the work has progressed as indicated and is in accordance to the contract documents. Once the architect issues the certificate for payment, the owner pays the contractor. Now on to programming and analysis. Which of the following building shapes is most appropriate for a temperate climate? A, B, C, or D? Pause to answer. And the correct answer is B. The best orientation and shape of the building in a temperate climate is an elongated form running east to west. This provides advantages with winter solar heat gain, daylighting, and minimizing heat gain in the summer. For cool buildings, you want to keep the footprint tight and limit the surface area so there's less heat loss. For hot and arid, you want open courtyards to keep air flowing. And for hot and humid, you want the building to run east to west so that they can capture cool breezes and minimize severe heat gain during the sunrise and sunset. Moving on to our next exam, project planning. And our question is, which of the following factors affect wind pressure on a building? Select 3 that apply. Building height, building type, building weight, building shape, surrounding terrain, soil composition. Pause here to answer. And the correct answer is building height, building shape, and surrounding terrain. The building type, weight, and soil composition do not affect wind pressures on a building. Shape plays a big role in the effects of wind on a building. The more streamlined or aerodynamic, like this round building, will experience less wind pressure than buildings with sharp edges. Tall buildings are subject to higher wind pressures not only because their surface area is greater, but also since wind is faster the higher you go up. Why is that? Well, closer to the ground, there are typically things that slow down the wind, like trees, other buildings, and maybe even hills. This is similar to our next factor, which is terrain. If a building were sitting out in an open prairie, no trees, mountains, or other buildings in sight, then that building would have greater wind pressure than a building surrounded by trees or protected by hills. This valley diagram is a bit extreme, but you get the gist. Another factor not listed in the question is wind speed. This one is pretty straightforward. The faster the wind, the higher the pressure will be on the building. An interesting tidbit for you, whenever wind speed is doubled, it results in a quadrupling of wind pressure on a building. Yikes. A brief pause here to remind you that I post new questions every week, so please hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out on a video. It also really helps me out, so thank you. Now on to project development. Of the buildings listed below, which three would require complex wind calculations and possibly wind tunnel testing? An office building with a height of 425 feet, a commercial building with a height to width ratio of 4, a community center with a height of 40 feet, an office building with a height to width ratio of 6, a suspension bridge, a residential building with a height of 115 feet. Pause here to answer. And the answer is an office building with a height of 425 feet, an office building with a height to width ratio of 6, and a suspension bridge. In general, complex wind calculations and wind tunnel testing are required for buildings exceeding 400 feet in height. They're also required for buildings subject to dynamic effects, that is, vibrations or oscillations, those that are sensitive to wind, and for buildings with a height to width ratio of 5 or more. Wind tunnel testing on suspension bridges is typically done with a reduced scaled model of the bridge. Next up is construction evaluation. Which of the following concrete tests require taking a sample at the time the concrete is poured? Impact hammer test, cylinder test, core cylinder test, or hygrometer test? Pause to answer. And the answer is cylinder test. A cylinder test takes samples of the concrete mixture as it's poured. These cylinders are typically 6 inches in diameter and 12 inches in height. Once the concrete has cured for 28 days, the cylinders undergo compressive strength testing with a hydraulic press. They slowly add pressure until a failure occurs. The compressive strength is calculated and compared to the project requirements. A core cylinder test is very similar to a cylinder test, but samples are taken once the concrete has cured and they're taken from the project slab itself. A diamond-tipped core drill is used to extract the sample. The locations and depths of these samples are defined in the specifications. And just like the cylinder test, these samples are subjected to the same compressive strength test. Impact hammer test, also known as a rebound hammer test, is a non-destructive method used to assess the compressive strength of hardened concrete. A spring-loaded plunger snaps against the concrete surface and the rebound distance is measured. The amount of rebound gives us an approximate reading of the concrete strength. And finally, a hygrometer test is used to determine the moisture emissions of the concrete. As promised in last week's video, our bonus question has to do with the different types of covenants. Here we go. Which type of covenant requires the buyer to perform a specific duty in the future? Restrictive covenant, affirmative covenant, or conditional covenant? Pause to answer. And the correct answer is affirmative covenant. An affirmative covenant requires a buyer to perform a specific duty in the future. This could be like maintaining landscaping or installing a fence after purchasing the property. A restrictive covenant is exactly as it sounds. It restricts the use of the property. This could be that you can only build single-family homes on it, or anything you build must be painted yellow, or maybe a portion of the property is a preserved environment, so you're not allowed to build in that area. A conditional covenant could also exist. This one gives the property back to the original owner if the restrictions are not followed. So if any of the examples I gave for the other two were not followed, then the property could be taken away. That's our questions for this week. Remember to check out the description for links to some of the AIA contracts covered in this video. I've also linked some of my favorite study books, so go check those out. Let me know in the comments what subject areas you're struggling with, and I'll do my best to cover it in the next video. Thank you all for joining. Please subscribe, and good luck on your next exam. You got this.